We're here. Theo, very good morning to you.
Very good morning to you, Mike.
If you were to sort of categorise a political situation where somebody picks up a huge stone, it's not even a pebble, and throws it into the lake and just waits for the reaction, that's pretty much what Nigel Farage did yesterday.
And we knew he was going to do it, and he did it, and it's had the desired effect. And just on that, you mentioned, of course, doing a deal with the Taliban. Now Number 10 and the Home Office are contemplating doing a deal with the Taliban.
They're all because what's interesting, before the Taliban gave their announcement, which was sort of later in the afternoon, everyone was going, well, hang on, he hasn't obviously given any thought to this, because he's going to have to do deals with people like the Taliban.
I listened to an interview, and literally the person doing the interview was spluttering into their cornflakes. You can't possibly do a deal with the Taliban.
Right.
And now it looks like Number 10 are going to go back.
Well, yeah, why not?
Are going to say, let's do a deal with the. We need to do a deal with the Taliban. They're not ruling it out. That was the reaction. So in terms of, it sent shockwaves, this announcement, because suddenly Number 10 and the government, Keir Starmer and his government, they've got to do something, because there's a man who's in Nigel Farage.
He's saying, you know what he's doing? He's saying all the things that we've been saying, sitting here for the best part of the last 5 years. And he's actually saying them out loud in a press conference.
And what's the timing of this is really interesting, because last September, Nigel Farage gave an interview in which he said it was a political impossibility to do mass deportations. And what he's done very successfully is he's allowed the situation to become so bad. You rightly, Mike, all of your listeners have always been on board. This is a problem that just needs to be dealt with, right? But the country hasn't necessarily followed. But the situation has now got so bad. We've seen the numbers, we've seen we've seen the build-up, we've seen what's happening. It happened in Epping. The way the situation has transpired...
Ordinary people have started to revolt.
Exactly. Ordinary people are now coming on board and saying, you need to do something. And that's why suddenly Nigel Farage has presented this plan now, and it doesn't seem so shocking. It doesn't seem really unreasonable. And actually it's something that most people...
Let's face it, he announces that let's leave the ECHR a day after David Blunkett has urged it in the Times, who is a former Home Secretary in the Labour government of Tony Blair.
And I mean, I've heard rumours that Labour might be looking to follow suit as we get into the autumn. But can you really trust Keir Starmer to take us out of the ECHR? No. So
you can't trust Keir Starmer literally to walk down the street in a straight line.
But Farage has always been. This is what needs to happen.
He's been talking about this like we have for the best part of the last 5 years.
And it won't. That's not to say it won't be a huge battle to make it happen, because the ECHR underpins things like the Good Friday Peace Agreement with Northern Ireland, right? That brings peace to Northern Ireland.
I don't care. I don't care.
You want it sorted?
I don't care. The IRA can get stuffed, and I put them all back in jail if it was up to me. I couldn't give a stuff about the Good Friday Agreement.
But he's going to, and it can be done. And if you look, there's a really interesting piece on page 10, Charles Harness did it again in the Telegraph. And actually, what the experts are saying, from what Farage is looking at, yes, it is possible. It's going to be very difficult, but it can be done. As long as he's got it clear in his manifesto when he comes in, and reform with the Tories, without the Tories, has a large majority in the House of Commons.
The people of this country will back Nigel Farage. Let's have a look at some of the things he said, because obviously this all happened about 10:30, 11 o'clock yesterday morning, so after our show had finished, and I realised that many of you will be watching and have watched Talk over the course of the last 24 hours, but if you haven't, let's have a look at what Farage said about public disorder.
That without action, without somehow the contract between the government and the people being renewed, without some trust coming back, then I fear deeply that anger will grow. In fact, I think there is now, as a result of this, a genuine threat to public order.
There is a genuine threat to public order, as we are seeing up and down the country every single week. It gets larger. So far, the demonstrations are relatively peaceful, because they're sort of run by the Pink Brigade, as the one is in the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf in London, and mostly it's women and children and families who are doing it, and that tells you that it's not extremists, it's not the Tommy Robinson Brigade, it's ordinary people who are going, enough is enough. We can't walk around our streets anymore without being harassed by these horrible, ghastly, awful immigrants who have come here, who are clearly not used to dealing with ordinary British women, and they can't handle it.
And I think it's really important that I think it's really important that the protests remain peaceful.
Yeah.
Because actually,
of course it is.
if you look at what Nigel Farage is saying, it's something he doesn't want to see happen. That's his argument. At least you can see whether you believe it or not. But if the protests remain peaceful, then that gives him the credibility to come in and sort the problem out. Farage, I thought yesterday, he went from being that transition from being somebody who just is a political disruptor who wants to, turn over the apple cart over in SW1 in Westminster to actually being a Prime Minister in waiting. Yeah. He needs to sort this out, and he's got a plan to sort it out. And actually, broadly speaking, when you look at the detail of what he's proposing, you can argue over the numbers, you can argue over the fact it's very difficult to do, but actually, I think it is a plausible plan. I think it is something that government can.
I mean, the point is that the window has moved, hasn't it? You know, it's no longer anathema, apart from dealing with people like John McDonnell and sort of the mad lefties of the Jeremy Corbyn party. It's no longer untenable to suggest that if people come here illegally, they can't stay. If people come here illegally, they have to be deported. If people come here illegally, they have no rights. You know, that used to be a major problem for the Conservative Party. It's not a problem for Nigel Farage now.
But the problem the Conservative Party had was that they made that the case, that if you came here illegally, you had no right to stay here.
Right.
But because they didn't deport them, you just ended up with this huge logjam of people just staying here, unable to have their applications processed because the government hadn't. They had no right to have applications in the first place.
And they started putting them in hotels, which in 2018 wasn't a massive problem because only about 5,000 or 6,000 people came. But now you're talking about 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. You've now got 180,000 people living here in hotels and/or HMOs who shouldn't be here.
And the migrants who came here were perfectly happy to accept it because they were just stuck in hotels. Their applications not being not being processed because they weren't able to make applications.
Well, this is why they keep coming, because they knew if they could set foot on the sandbanks of Dover or whatever it was, the shingle beaches of southeast England, that they would be able to stay here for this sort of time immemorial. And that's the problem. Let's have a look at what Farage says about what reform will actually do about illegal immigration.
But here's what we have to do to make Operation Restoring Justice actually work. We have to leave the ECHR. No ifs, no buts. It may have been a good idea 80 years ago. Frankly, it isn't today. We have to repeal the Human Rights Act of 1998, brought in by a Blair government, many of whose families seem to do rather well off the back of it. We will, for a 5-year period, disapply the 1951 Refugee Convention and any other barriers that can be used by lawyers in this country to prevent deportations, to prevent the right thing from happening. We'll create a legal duty for the Home Secretary to remove those that come illegally. And crucially, we will detain all illegal migrants who come, and we will do so immediately.
Now, of course, Keir Starmer says that that's what he's doing, but we know he's not doing that, despite the number of times that he puts it out on Twitter. If you come to this country, you'll be detained in return. He's not detaining anyone. They claimed yesterday they had detained 100 people, right? What we know is that 3,000 at least have come since they announced the one-in, one-out scheme about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. So
and he sent nobody back to France.
Nobody's been
and even if he does send anybody back to France, according to the Keir Starmer deal, he'll get another 100 people coming the other way.
Yes,
because they'll identify, except it's not one in, one out, because 100 people come here, he sends them back to France, another 100 people come in, that's 100 people plus what we used to have, you know what I mean?
So look, Farage, this is probably the most challenging bit of the whole announcement from Farage yesterday. We've got a detention estate of 2,500, and most of those who fill those beds or those cells come out of prison. They're foreign nationals who've come out of prison and are waiting to be deported, so they can't just be let out into freedom and then be expected to come back. So they're then placed in. They go from prison into detention accommodation, and he's got to ramp that up from 2,500 up to 24,000, and that's going to be really difficult. That's going to be really difficult to do.
Yeah, or impossible, some might say.
But as long as he can, because part of the problem is that if you tell somebody that you're going to deport them, and you put them in a hotel or you put them in a house of multiple occupancy, you're not going to see them again.
Yeah.
They're going to flee. They're going to enter the grey economy, and then you're going to be impossible to track down.
Right.
So that's a really key part of it, and it's going to have to be a former military site. They're going to have to build very quickly, and to get that
migration centres.
Yeah,
but
migration centres.
Other places have done it. You know, other countries in Europe have done it. They've done it in Greece. They've done it in Italy. You know, they've stopped the boats coming into those two countries, basically, by and large, because they've just said, look, if you come here, you won't be given any kind of succour or comfort. You will be sent straight back from whence you came, and you will be considered to be a criminal. Yeah,
and you go into one of those centres. That's I would from looking at it, I think that's probably the biggest challenge of it. But yeah, absolutely, it can be done as long as it's clear in the manifesto, and as long as he gets a majority in the House of Commons. Then he can put it through the House of Commons, and the House of Lords can't repeal it because it's been in the manifesto. So they can't say, "Well, we didn't know about it." They have to accept what's been. They have to accept the will of the House of Commons, and it would go through.
And when it comes to the Taliban, for example, you know, there will be those people, and some of them who were asking the question yesterday. Well, if you do deal with the Taliban and you send all these Afghans back to Afghanistan, what happens if they all get tortured and murdered? To which I think Nigel Farage's view, I don't know whether he said it yesterday, would be, well, you know, tough.
I think he said it in an interview with the Times, didn't he? He did an interview with the Times for the weekend, and he turned around and he said, well, we can't be expected to take everyone. Where do our obligations actually, the most British people, where do our obligations stop?
Yeah.
And he'd make the argument, and this is, you know, it might get ugly. It might get ugly. You might end up in a situation where 10 people get deported.
Couldn't give a stuff, quite frankly.
Get deported.
Right, let's have a look at how Sky News actually dealt with this, because here's an episode. I mean, a lot of people asking questions about this. Sky News focused on the term fighting age men. Check this out.
But there's one use of language that I heard Theo Usherwood use today. I think Nigel Farage used it as well during the speech. Yeah. This idea of talking about fighting-age men coming over here. You know how loaded that is. You know what that suggests.
You know the countries they're coming from?
Let me finish the point before you answer. Yeah. It's indicative of this idea of invasion. I mean, and Ellie Chowns, actually, not to quote her all the time, but she talked about, when we talk about working-age men, which actually you used earlier, you said that people coming here who want to work, that is something different. So why use this fighting age over working age?
I tell you why. Because the places that most of these people are coming from, if you look at the countries from which they're arriving, these are countries where there is a state of war.
And that's Gawain Towler, who is a former assistant to Nigel Farage, spin doctor for Reform, who comes on this show quite regularly, and who is a man who speaks very well, I think, on behalf of Reform. That's a typical kind of, you know, Sky News take on it, right? Why do you use these terrible terms? Why do you suggest that these are fighting age men? Well, because they're coming from places where there's supposed to be a war going on, where they're supposed to be fighting, where they're supposed to be fleeing horrors that are going on behind their backs. They come to this country in order to escape that, and so therefore they are fighting age men. Surely that's not a problem.
The real scandal in all of this is we just don't know who they are.
Right.
We just don't know who these individuals are.
Why is the media, and I don't like to call them the mainstream media, because we are also mainstream. You know, we are run by the biggest news organisation in the entire world, so it's wrong to say that we're not mainstream media, right? But what I would say is the BBC and Sky in particular have got a real bee in their bonnet, because they think that we're all right-wing, racist, horrible people, and we're categorising, and that's their problem.
That's the
and they're categorising these men, saying, oh, they're vulnerable men, they're coming, you know, they're not vulnerable men. Many of them are rapists, many of them are sexual assaulters, many of them are criminals, and many of them are undesirable people who should not be anywhere near this bloody country at all. Thank you very much.
And we don't know, and nobody can provide an answer as to who they are. There are no checks,
right? And
they are just you arrive in the.
But what's wrong with the media? This is my question, and I know that it's difficult because you know you don't necessarily want to castigate them, but I will. You know, they should be being more responsible and sticking up for Britain as opposed to going, oh, why are you calling them fighting age men? Well, because they bloody well are fighting age men. You complete plonker.
If you imagine, this is where I stand it. If you imagine that somebody was to say, if you were to start all over again, and you were to suddenly say, we are going to allow 800 people, mostly men, to turn up at Dover every single day.
Right.
We don't know who they are or where they've come from or whether they have any criminal records. And we're just going to put them. We're going to allow them into this country.
Sort of weird views about women.
Anything. We don't know anything about them. And we're then going to place them in hotels or in houses
and
of
give them
occupancy.
and give them the opportunity to wander around the towns in which they are now living.
It would be madness. We're in a situation which is sort of like the boiling a frog slowly.
Yeah.
Where it's suddenly okay because the situation has got so progressively worse that we suddenly find ourselves in a situation where we think, well, that sounds reasonable. It is, the situation at the moment is unsustainable.
Yeah.
It has to be.
And it's also unacceptable.
Yeah, unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. Yeah. You know, if I had a teenage daughter, I don't, luckily, she's a bit older now, but walking around anywhere near one of these hotels, you know, I'd be walking with her, and if one of these scumbags came out and started leering at her and started talking to her and started trying to chat her up, you know, you'd get a punch in the face. Simple as that. And that's how people feel.
People are really angry.
That's how people feel.
People are really angry.
Right?
Yeah, people are really angry.
And they're quite right to do it. How about this? Surely it's time now, says Howard in Suffolk, to shut down BBC News, Sky News, Channel 4 and ITV. Questions from the mainstream media yesterday at the press conference were so out of touch. Listen, I don't want to shut down any media at all. No. That would be wrong. However, they need to take a stiff lesson from what we do here, and they need to understand that if you're going to... You know, Nigel Farage stood there for an hour yesterday and took a load of questions from the media, and almost all of them were from a left-wing perspective. And that's where this country's gone wrong, because you've got an entire nation which is not represented by its media, you know? We are we understand we're a small part of the media, as is GB News, but we're actually telling the truth. But these bloody idiots aren't.
And something in favour of Nigel Farage, to stick up for Nigel Farage, is that every press conference he always takes all of the questions. And there's this. What I would say is I think there's a bit of a myth that Farage isn't putting himself up to scrutiny.
Right.
If Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, I'm not saying he will become Prime Minister,
I think
come to a general election, but he would have faced more scrutiny than any other political leader. To announce a major plank of your policy this far out from a general election, 2029, to 3.5, 4, going on 4 years out from a general election, to face that scrutiny and to bus in journalists and to take questions from... I didn't see any complaints yesterday from any journalist who wasn't permitted to ask a question.
No.
From right across, including those of a left-wing bent, shows that actually he is putting... You cannot lay it at Farage's door, which is often the case of criticism of Farage, that he dodges or he evades scrutiny.
No, he doesn't. He never has.
He is getting more scrutiny. He is getting more scrutiny now.
The only guy that evades scrutiny is bloody Keir Starmer, who hardly ever has a press conference. And I don't think Keir Starmer's ever had a press conference where he has allowed the press to ask him questions for an hour.
No,
I don't think he's ever done that.
I've been to many of them.
You've been in the room,
and he is not. And
he scuttles off.
And there are a limited number of questions.
Exactly.
Usually not more than 4 or 5
Exactly,
questions.
absolutely extraordinary. Theo Usherwood's here. Somebody who's obviously lost the plot says Theo Usherwood is an excellent guest with Mike Graham. He's rational and very well informed.
Sorry.
Gordon in Glasgow. Well informed and rational. I'm sorry. It's 6:24. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:28. I don't know where the first half hour has gone, frankly. We're here with Theo Usherwood, and we're talking about Nigel Farage's press conference yesterday, because Nigel Farage did what most politicians never do, actually came out and told the truth, one, and two, actually told people in this country what they wanted to hear. Let's have a voice note from Paul.
I'm still reeling off Nigel Farage yesterday, me. Absolutely ecstatic. The best speech I've heard in politics. It really is. So we'll see what he does, eh? Have a good day, mate. And yeah, I'm sat here watching you. So crack on, pal. Let's get it on.
Let's get it on, Paul. Absolutely right. I mean, people like to hear politicians talking their language, and nobody else does it better than Nigel Farage. Let's have a look at what Channel 4 News said when they were asked to ask a question to him yesterday.
There is a realistic possibility that if you go forward with this, there might be a case where someone arrives in the UK by a small boat, you send them back to the country from which they came, and they will be tortured or killed because of a decision that you've made. How does that sit with you?
Well, the alternative, of course, is to do nothing. I mean, that's the very clear alternative, is we just do nothing. We just allow this problem to magnify and grow. We cannot be responsible for all the sins that take place around the world. It's just literally impossible.
And that is a very good and cogent kind of conversation to have. And when you see the number of people there who were there from the press, I don't know if you were there yesterday, but you see the pull that Nigel Farage has. And he's quite right to say, you know, we can't be responsible for what happens to people. If they have decided to come here, risk their lives to get here, come over on the, you know, the dinghies from Calais, you know, and we deport them back to the place from which they came, it's not really our problem. If they get tortured, if they get killed, I mean, he didn't quite say it in those words, but this from Malk in Hertfordshire, who says, why the big hoo-ha about reform sending illegals back to Afghanistan? Denmark and Germany, to name but two, have sent people back there, and they have. But that's absolutely right.
The other thing to say, Mike, is that people who come to this country from Afghanistan, or let's say another country where they would face torture, or death, is they travel through countries and then they decide to come to Britain.
Yeah, exactly.
When there's been polling of these migrants, are like, where do you want to come to? They all want to come to England. They all want to come to Britain.
Yeah, right.
This is the El Dorado.
I wonder why that is.
And this is the El Dorado.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, giving you a lecture about your pull factors and the fact that people can come here and work here and
when French politicians actually call this country El Dorado for migrants,
you know, so the point is, and Farage didn't make this point yesterday, and maybe they will further down the line. But if you are travelling from Afghanistan and you are seeking refuge and you are seeking freedom, you know, trying not to be tortured and trying not to be murdered by the Taliban, and you get to a country, let's say Germany or France, you are safe in that country. You could be safe in Greece. You could be safe in Turkey. You don't have then to come on to Britain. And part of the problem is that this country has become the end point, the landing point. The problem in this country is more acute.
This is the final destination.
You know, when Emmanuel Macron came over and gave that press conference with Keir Starmer, he said, you know, we've had problems in the northern region of France with migrants. We've got problems in Bournemouth. We've got problems in Norfolk. We've got problems in Essex. The problems that Macron talks about in one region of France are right across the country. Because of the pressures.
To be fair to France, I mean, they've also got problems all over the place. I mean, you remember the Bataclan, which that horrible, ghastly, you know, invasion of Paris in 2015 by a load of Islamist, you know, fundamentalists with machine guns who came into a music venue and started just murdering people and butchering them. You know, most of them came from a tiny, tiny town in Belgium because that's where they had kind of coagulated over the course of the previous 10 years, and it was more or less a no-go area. So France has got a whole region of different, you know, problems. Whether it's not, I mean, he might talk about, you know, the northern coast of Normandy, but he's also got problems in Marseille. He's got problems in Nice. He's got problems in Lyon. He's got problems all over France.
But to be fair, I mean, you know, we can compare France and Britain. You know, our intelligence services are the best in the world, and when it comes to dealing with those kind of extremists, we are.
No, I get that. I get that. What I'm saying is that it's not. He doesn't just have a problem in Calais.
No, he doesn't just have a problem in Calais. But when he spoke about the problem of migrants,
these are dangerous people. You know, let's not beat about the bush here. You know, let's not pretend that they're all sweetness and light. You know, we saw pictures yesterday in the front pages of men carrying children and trying to get into boats, and I'm sure there's a bit of that going on. But by and large, I would say those people doing that are putting their own children at risk. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't take my child on a dangerous journey across the channel on a dinghy. You know, because I would call that child abuse. But you know, an awful lot of these people who are coming to Britain, who have come from France, you know, are, you know, potentially machine gun wielding scumbag Islamist fundamentalists.
But they've got safety. This is the crazy thing. They've got safety. They're in France. They're safe. They're in Germany. They're in Spain if they've come across from North Africa. They're in Italy. They've reached safety. They've reached the point of safety. They don't, you know, if you wanted to say let's be part of a system where actually we take a number of people, a defined number of people, we can do the checks on them, and we can find out exactly who they are, whether they've got a criminal record, and whether they have even a legitimate, any sort of legitimate right to stay in this country. Most people would say that's okay, but you can't have this taxi system that's taking place across the English Channel, where they're escorted into the middle of the English Channel, picked up by the border force, brought back to Dover, and then given...
because all of these people, and this is why Nigel Farage was so clever yesterday to do the press conference that he did, because he asked, for example, let's have a look at this, whose side are you actually on when it comes to migration? Check it out.
And what began as a protest of mothers and concerned citizens outside the Bell Hotel in Epping has now spread right across the country. And all of it really poses one big fundamental question. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of women and children being safe on our streets? Or are you on the side of outdated international treaties backed up by a series of dubious courts?
And that, again, is a very popular point to make. You know, whose side are you actually on? Do you really want to continue to see this ridiculous kind of influx of people of whom, as you say, we know nothing? Or do you want to be on the side of women, children and families who are actually protesting about the fact that they're putting up with these ghastly individuals in their communities?
And it's those parts of the country, not so well off parts of the country outside of London, that are bearing the brunt of this. And it makes, and when you have a system like our asylum system that is completely broken, that doesn't work, that is allowing people who we do know nothing about to come to this country to effectively work, because we've got no sanction against them, and the you know, hotels or houses of multiple occupancy, that actually it makes it removes the liberal argument, any liberal argument, for saying we actually need, and this is where I think partly I think what's happened is there are a lot of people who actually would like us to have a fair and equitable and functioning asylum system, so that we are able to help people.
But those voices are getting smaller and
smaller. But they're getting drowned out because the system's completely broken.
Well, you end up with people like John McDonnell, you know, the former shadow chancellor when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's opposition party in Labour, a man who was a fine supporter of the IRA, talking about how, oh, isn't it terrible that this is the kind of country we are now, we're going to be, you know, rejecting children who want to come here for a safe haven. Well, that's not the story, I'm afraid. John McDonnell, you got it completely bloody wrong, because at the end of the day, it's not about children coming here seeking refuge, it's about grown men, fighting age men, whether Channel 4 or the BBC like it or not, coming here and molesting women. That's what they're doing.
People are, you know,
on a regular basis in all sorts of parts of the country.
Yeah, look, it's
the argument's over, as far as I'm concerned. You know, when they said, you know, climate change, there is no argument anymore. Over immigration, illegal immigration, the argument's done.
And that's why
there isn't anywhere to go.
And that's ultimately why Farage has chosen this moment.
Yeah. Because
the argument is done.
Yeah.
If he was to have done this announcement a year ago, you would have had this, well, what is this? You know, that voice that you heard there, where you say, well, what about what happens if somebody is deported and then they're tortured back in Afghanistan?
Exactly.
That would have had much more credence and it would have had much more gravitas to it, right? But because, of course, we've had all of the news, we've seen what's happened over the past 12 months. We've now got a system that's got worse under this government. The timing for Farage works.
Nearly 52,000 people have come here illegally since Keir Starmer's been Prime Minister. 52,000.
And it will surpass.
Where are they all living? We've only got 32,000 apparently in hotels.
How's the multiple occupancy?
So
flats.
Yeah,
houses.
exactly. But people yesterday and all of this week have started getting in touch with me saying, actually, there's an HMO down my street. We're not happy about it. People know what's going on. People are not going to put up with it.
And there's no, and as you had a councillor from Portsmouth, was that last week? Who said actually the council wasn't even told.
Yeah.
So you had the Home Office just go, we've brought up this house, and that's also having a knock-on effect in terms of it's driving up rents. So that if you're trying to rent in an area and a landlord can charge the Home Office, you know,
and again, the bottom line is the government can't continue to treat the public in this country, who are the taxpayers, who fund all of this crap, as if they're completely not worth talking to.
Well, they're going back to the Court of Appeal tomorrow.
We're not having it. It's as simple as that. 0344 499 1000. It's 6:39. Let's get a voice note from James.
Good morning, Mike. Now it's tough talk from Nigel. Let's hope he can deliver it if he gets elected. I just want these scumbags deported, Mike. That's all I'm asking for. People that shouldn't be in this country, out you go. Tough, get out. I can't understand how people would disagree with that. But that's just me anyway, Mike. Anyway, keep up the great work, Mike. Superb show.
James, thank you very much indeed. That's how people feel, you know. Whether or not some of these people may be deserving, they don't give a crap. They basically say, look, they're scumbags, they come in here, we know that they're committing offences. Not all of them, but an awful lot of them are. And in every single part of this country where these people are being put up, we're seeing it more and more and more. People are being arrested, people are being caught out, you know, molesting children, trying to kidnap children, trying to rape young women, sexually assault them. You know, it's an absolute farrago of madness.
But it was interesting, your correspondent there who sent in that WhatsApp voice note made the point he wants Farage to deal with it, right? So that's going to be the...
People believe that Farage will do it.
Look,
and that's a big difference from what they think Keir Starmer... Keir Starmer put out a tweet yesterday, more or less kind of, somebody suggested to me, he said, I put it into ChatGPT, how do you make me sound like Nigel Farage? And that was what his tweet was. You know, it was like, you know, if you come to this country, you will be detained and deported. Except you won't be, because he's not doing it.
No.
You know, he said he was doing it. Yesterday we were told he's got 100 people to deport. Well, let's see them. And where are they being held? And let's see you deporting them. You know, he's not doing it because he knows he can't. It's not happening. It's 6:40. We'll take more and more of your calls. Brilliant move by Nigel. It's called a deterrent. If they think they're going back to Afghanistan, they'll stay in Europe and not come here, says Steve in Sussex. I think that's a very good point, actually, because, you know, people worry about, you know, whether or not the Taliban's going to stone them to death. One, I couldn't give a toss whether they get stoned to death. Two, if they're in France, maybe they'd be better off staying there, because they go, if they come to Britain, they'll be back in Kabul before you can say kaboom. You know what I mean? We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:43. I'm Mike Graham. This from Simon in Durham, who says, I think what Farage puts forward is what most right-thinking people want. Whether it's able to be enacted is something we can't properly answer yet. A huge overhaul is essential all the same, or at the very least a desire to try. The issue might be if reform don't form a majority, any coalition might leave a lot of what he proposes in the dust. Well, I mean, that certainly is an issue which we may have to discuss as we get closer and closer to, you know, the next government and the next election. Theo Usherwood with me here. There's no question, though, that he's set his stall out, and everybody else is now chasing him and following him in his wake. You know, Kemi Badenoch yesterday tried to say, oh, he's just nicked all of our ideas. And everyone went, yeah, thanks very much, see you later. Nobody cares. Keir Starmer tried to put out a tweet yesterday which kind of echoed what Nigel Farage said. Everybody knows Keir Starmer is not Nigel Farage. He's not going to be able to do it.
So he's basically, he's completely taking us out of the ECHR. That's the difference. He's not disapplying it. He's not changing the rules.
He's not suspending relationship.
He's just taking us. He's taking us out of it. He's then got to. He's then going to have to. In what this is, two things might happen. He needs to then unpick it from domestic law, and then there may be a common law challenge. And this is what Dominic Grieve. I know this is a kind of throw the staple at the wall moment, Mike. Former of Remain, former Attorney General, Conservative Attorney General, made the argument that judges may try and use common law to uphold asylum claims in this country, and then it's likely that reform would have to change the law to block that from happening. So you're probably looking at a window, providing they have a decent majority in the House of Commons. It's in the manifesto, but you're probably looking at a window of 12 to 18 months before anything happens, where they get the law ship-shape, ready to go, the legislative process takes place, and then you will see, and then once that's in place, and this is the point that Rishi Sunak never got to, Keir Starmer has been absolutely adamant until this point, he doesn't want to get to in terms of removing us from the ECHR. There's some talk that Labour may shift on that as we head into the autumn. Let's wait and see what exactly they say. But actually then when you get to the sort of a year, 18 months in, if Farage can get the law as it needs to be, then you can start. Then he could start as a government deporting people very quickly to countries. You can start detaining them.
Well, we've seen it in America. You know, Trump said he would do it, and he did it. You know, and he's still facing various problems. You know, there are still legal problems, and some judges are challenging him, some states are challenging him, but he's getting it done. And he said when he was talking to somebody, I can't remember who, he said, you know, what's the number of illegal migrants coming across the border in the last month? 0. And they've done it in Greece, they're doing it in Italy. It can be done.
There's 2 points. You know, I don't think if Farage deported 500,000 or 400,000 migrants in his first parliament as Prime Minister, I don't think anybody would begrudge him that and say, well, what about the extra 200,000, right? The other point is, then this is the really important point that you make, is that suddenly you really do break the business model, because when you end up as a migrant on the north coast of France, and you realise, you see the news, you see the TikTok videos of people being deported, you have
and also that point made by one of our listeners and viewers, if you think you're going to get sent back to Afghanistan, you might just stay where you are.
Exactly.
And I think that's the point.
And then suddenly the business model breaks, because you don't want to pay somebody to come to a country which is suddenly going to land you back in Afghanistan 6 weeks later. So you'll end up staying in France. The part of the problem, I think, will be with this, and you can say it's a problem or not a problem, but you know who's going to hate it, right? Macron's going to hate it, the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is going to hate it. Europe is going to go mad with this.
Well, it's their fault that they're all there in the first place, thanks to Angela Merkel and a stupid idea to bring in everyone from Syria and go, if you're from Syria, just come to Germany. Meanwhile, they came from every bloody country in the world. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves, though. She's on the front page of The Times today. She's been handed a fresh economic dilemma as she prepares for the autumn budget by surging government borrowing costs, which were close to their highest level in nearly 3 decades yesterday. Now, if you were Rachel Reeves and you were under the pressure that she's under, would you go out and do a sort of cheery video about how great you're doing and how wonderful the economy is? I would suggest probably not. However, that's not what she did, because she decided, actually, let me go out and trying to convince everyone that everything's going really, really well. Here's what she actually did yesterday. Check it out.
Hi, Mark. Hello, I'm Rachel. The thriving creative industry sector here in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Lovely to meet you all. Support local and national government here in Wales. And bring more investment to Scotland and the whole of the United Kingdom. This is all part of our plan for change. Growing the economy, creating more good jobs, paying decent wages in all parts of the country to make working people better off.
So she's gone to Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland to try and prove that everything's going well, shaking hands with a bloke with no teeth, going, this is great, isn't it fantastic?
That's not you on the guitar.
It's like the Shadows backing group, What's she thinking? This woman is completely and utterly useless. She's also promoted that complete and utter moron, Torsten Bell, who everybody tells me is very important and incredibly intelligent.
Very intelligent.
That's what they all say, right?
Very intelligent.
Do you remember when they said Sue Gray was the greatest analyser of government policy in the world, and that she was going to chart the first 100 days, and that she was a woman of great integrity, didn't even last 100 days, 93 days she lasted, and that was her own plan, right? This bloke, Torsten Bell, is the guy that came up with the Ed Stone for Ed Miliband.
The pledges, the commandments.
The 10 Commandments of Ed Miliband.
Didn't the Son find it in a lockup?
Yeah, it's in a lockup down in Hastings. Yeah. Somebody should just take a hammer to it and start. But this, the problem with politics in this country is that the myths are sort of written by people who don't know anything about the real world, and they go, Torsten Bell. First of all, his name's Torsten. That immediately disqualifies him, in my view, from being anybody sensible talking to the general public. I would lock him in a room and don't let him out. And if he's that clever, let's see what he's actually come up with. What has he actually done that makes him clever? What's he done that makes him clever? Sorry, I'm asking you.
I tell you who he worked for. He ran the Resolution Foundation.
So, what's that about?
It's about raising taxes.
Right. So, that makes him how does that make him clever? The guy's a moron. He came up with the Ed Stone. Retire now. Don't even bother going anywhere near the rest of the human race, because you're a complete bloody moron.
Right.
I'd like to have him sitting here where you're sitting, and I know that you might have to defend these people.
I'm not defending him. I'm not defending him.
But, you ran the Resolution Foundation where they went, let's just raise a load of taxes, and anybody who makes any money, just take it off them and give it to some, low-life scumbags who don't want to work, and maybe some migrants. Brilliant. Give the bloody twat a Nobel Peace Prize. Who cares? Right? I'm sorry. I'm in a bad mood. Sorry about the word twat. I didn't mean to say that. It came out wrong. I wanted to say twit. There's another word that begins with W and ends in cur that I also wanted to say, but that's why I went with twat. Anyway, sorry. I know it's early, 6:51. Sorry about that.
Right. Torsten Bell.
What's good about Torsten Bell? End. Anything else?
No.
Sorry.
Look, Rachel Reeves got to find £30 billion of tax rises because borrowing
because she's an idiot.
Because
she's an idiot, and she put all of these things in the last budget which ruined the economy and crashed it. And now she's going, I haven't got any money, so I'm going to have to tax you some more.
Yeah.
These people are morons. Do you not get it? These are not clever people. Rachel Reeves has got an IQ of about 5. Welcome to Northern Ireland. My producer says I should take a break before I say anything else. All right, fine. 6:52. See you in a minute. Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 6:55. I've been told that I'm going to stay away from politics now for a couple of minutes, and we'll do some showbiz to try and calm me down. I don't know whether that's going to work, though. Taylor Swift's on the front pages a lot this morning because she's getting engaged to her new beau, the man who is, of course, the American football player Travis Kelce. The pop singer posted the news on Instagram yesterday, and the Instagram and sort of the internet melted, didn't it? It's one of those things where
I mean, this is like the biggest.
People love Taylor Swift. I mean, I like Taylor Swift. I'm going to say it quite openly. I know there will be people who go, "Oh, why do you like her?" I just think she's great. I quite like her music. I think she's a brilliant. She's a very good-looking woman. She's a very independent and successful woman. Why wouldn't you like her?
And she's a fantastic talent, and we don't have. I feel like, the world is sort of when you can do all of your social media posts and everybody does their own stuff, user-generated content. We often, I think, have lost the sight of just having.
Let's face it,
straight-up pop stars.
Let's face it, and we're not going to make it political, but who would you rather champion, Taylor Swift or Carol Vorderman? Let's go with Taylor Swift, shall we?
Taylor Swift.
I think so. I think so. Very successful
but she's a proper pop star, and he's a proper sports star.
Yeah. They both excel in what they do.
And they're fantastic pictures.
Yeah.
And I love this. This is slightly lost on me, but maybe some of the younger listeners will get it. Your English teacher and gym teacher are getting married. Apparently, it's a Swift post set to So High School song about Kelce.
Oh, okay.
And I think
because what we shouldn't forget as well is when she came to the UK and rest of Europe to do her tour last year, I mean, there was so much money generated. Billions and billions and billions of pounds. I mean, people talk about the Oasis tour, which is done very, very well as well, and we should congratulate the Gallagher brothers for getting back together and stop being idiots. But Taylor Swift was the kind of the water carrier, if you like, who suddenly made this incredible money-making tour over the course of a year, where she went all over the world, and everywhere she went, people were paying, ridiculous amounts of money. Billions and billions of pounds generated for the economy here in Britain when she came. I think we should be very proud of Taylor Swift.
And it gave the music industry new life, because of course streaming means that you can't make money now for selling records.
No.
There's just no
live
Spotify,
performances.
It's just killed it. It's all about live performances. And suddenly if you've got that absolute star quality that she has, where people will travel far and wide to see you play, then you can do well. And like you said, it doesn't just create money for her, but all of the bars, all of the merchandise. The
business, rock and roll business. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the whole hospitality, promotion business, and apparently when they played at Murrayfield, Oasis, they took £2 million a night in the bar alone.
That's incredible.
2 million.
That's incredible.
I mean, that's a lot of drink, I know, but maybe Taylor Swift fans don't drink as much. And we have to finish up with Meghan Markle. I'm not going to say she's a great woman, independent woman. She's got a new series out which they filmed a while ago. We've got some clips which we'll play later, where she talks about, how awful it was having to wear nude tights in the royal family. Kinsey Schofield was going to be talking to us in a little while. Absolute rubbish, right? She didn't have to do that.
No,
she's a compulsive liar. She should actually join the government. They should give her a job in, they should get rid of Lisa Nandy and give Meghan Markle the job of media, culture and sport, so you can tell a load of lies every day.
I'm just being myself now. She's left the royal family. But that's being in the royal family is service.
That's what they keep saying.
That's what you do.
That's what they keep saying.
You have to turn up to things which you don't want to be at, and cut ribbons and pat people on the back and wish people well and ask them how they're doing, knowing you'll never see them again.
I know.
It's service.
It's not interesting. All right, we've got to go.